In going through some preparatory materials for college algebra and for algebra 2, I noticed that these problems appear, and these can be pretty difficult problems to figure out if you don't know the basic setup for these particular problems. Here I'm saying the absolute value of 5x minus 2 is equal to 3, or the absolute value of 5x minus 2 is less than 3. Now, in order to understand these problems and see how not really super easy, but how manageable they really are, let's look at three other more simple problems and see how they work, and then we can tell how to work these other problems. If we look at these three simpler problems graphically, we can see what the solution sets to them are. It's fairly simple to see. The absolute value of x is equal to 3. What two values, or what value of x, what values of x, when you take the absolute value, in other words, when you turn them into a positive number, are going to equal 3? Well, there's only two answers, 3 and negative 3. Same thing here, or sort of the same, a little bit different. What numbers, when you turn them into positive, are going to be less than 3? Well, that's going to be all the numbers from 3 to negative 3. For instance, if I looked at negative 2 right here, and I take the absolute value of negative 2, will that be less than 3? Yes, 2 is less than 3. But if I picked over here negative 4, will the absolute value of negative 4 be less than 3? No, 4 is not less than 3. So that one doesn't work. And finally, in this one, I've got x is greater than or equal to 3. You probably have already guessed it. That will be all the numbers that are bigger than 3 and all the numbers that are smaller than negative 3, including 3 and negative 3. Now, we can see what that looks like graphically, but now let's look at it algebraically. So this single absolute value equation breaks down into two not absolute value equations, x equals 3 or x equals negative 3, x equals negative 3 or x equals 3. And this breaks down into a three-sided inequality. X is somewhere in between negative 3 and 3. And this breaks down into an or statement. X is less than negative 3 or x is greater than 3. Now just look at that for a second. That's what's happening right here. X is either negative 3 or 3. Right here, we want the region in between negative 3 and 3. So x is greater than negative 3 or less than 3. And rather, this should be an and. This is an and. And here, x is less than negative 3 or greater than positive 3. Now let's use these same three algebraic ideas, these three algebraic ideas, to solve and to set up these three equations. So graphically, right here, we have again 3 and negative 3. And at this point, 5x minus 2 is actually equal to 3. 5x minus 2 is equal to 3. And at this point, 5x minus 2 is equal to negative 3. And there are two different places, so we have to have an or there. So if we add 2 to both sides, we end up with 5x is equal to negative 1, or 5x is equal to 5, so we end up with x equals 5. Oops, I'm sorry, 1. and x, or rather, x equals negative 1/5. Now there's the solution set for that first absolute value equality. Now for this absolute value inequality right here, I'm going to put, remember when we had absolute value of x is less than 3, that's the area between 3 and negative 3. So 5x minus 2 is going to be between negative 3 and 3. So then adding 2 to both sides, I end up with a 5 here. I end up with a negative 1 here. Dividing by 5, which is positive, so my signs don't change. I end up with negative 1/5 and 1 there. Now you can look at it as another way. I kind of like to look at it this way. There's my 3. There's my negative 3. When I added 2 to each part of this three-sided inequality, added 2, I'm kind of breaking down here. That simply shifts my dots over to positive 5 and negative 1. And then we divide the 5 out, and that takes this interval right here and moves it in to negative 1/5, 1. Puts that interval right there. And that's what we had here. Now, when the absolute value of x was greater than or equal to 3, then it was the solution set greater than 3 or equal to 3, and the solution set less than 3. So then we'll have 5x minus 2 is less than or equal to negative 3, or 5x minus 2 is greater than or equal to positive 3. And we've done this work right here, so we end up with less than or equal to negative 1/5, or greater than or equal to 1. And that graph, again, is going to look something like this. So absolute value greater than is going to be going out. Absolute value less than is going to be going in, a region in between. Absolute value equals is going to be 2 dots. Okay, now we'll move on in our next video to what happens when we have a slightly different situation.